Everybody, I just ran across this video I wanted to comment on. It makes two claims about biblical Hebrew from Genesis 1:1. One is based on real scholarship, but he overplays the influence of that scholarship, and the other is not based on any legitimate principles of biblical Hebrew etymology. He doesn't like the translation of Genesis 1:1. I don't either, but for completely different reasons. And what he asserts is that most scholars realize that bara means to separate or distinguish, not to create. And that's based on a paper from Ellen Van Wold a little over a decade ago, arguing from a cognitive linguistic point of view for this meaning. Now, that was a great paper. There was a great discussion that resulted from that. However, she is in the overwhelming minority view. Most scholars disagree with her. His other claim that shamai means something about non-existence or non-being, he breaks down the etymology in another video, but it's not based on any real principles of biblical Hebrew etymology. So,
getting a lot of ignorance in my comments again, so I figured I'd just clear a couple of things up.
This is an extremely problematic video. To begin with, dead languages have no native speakers, period. Extinct languages have no speakers of any kind. Historical linguistics is for any language that changes over time, living or dead, and linguistic anthropology is primary for living languages and learning how language influences society and vice versa. Semitic languages have never really been considered part of the Indo-European group. There have just been scholars who have been trying unsuccessfully for centuries to make that connection. If it exists at all, it's at a very, very high level. Don't know what the fixation on Greenberg and Zionism is all about. His grandfather didn't even have the name Greenberg. It was Zaito until Greenberg's father changed it after he immigrated from Poland. And the fact that white supremacists like Proto-Indo-European scholarship does not mean that scholars of PIE are white supremacists. Everybody, in this video I'm going to talk briefly about why I don't like the way that Genesis 1:1 tends to be translated in modern translations of the Bible. The first three words of the Hebrew Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim, are generally translated "in the beginning God created." But that first word, Bereshit, shouldn't be translated "in the beginning" because there's no definite article there. And everywhere else that we find that phrase, it is in a construct relationship with some kind of temporal clause. So it's interpreted as when something began. And the vowels are the exact same in Genesis 1:1, and that's most likely how we're supposed to interpret it. In other words, it should be when God began to create. There is no absolute beginning reference in Genesis 1:1. That is just something that serves certain theological power structures to talk about creation ex nihilo.
Of mass shootings stopped by armed civilians in the United States in the last 3 decades is...
Hey everybody, I wanted to comment on this video because it does overlap with some things that I've researched on the relationship of religion to gun violence, gun rhetoric, gun rights, the history of guns in America. It's not true that armed civilians have stopped zero mass shooters in the last 30 years. They do stop mass shooters and active shooters sometimes. However, they are less likely to stop an active shooter than an unarmed civilian, and far less likely to stop it than law enforcement. So that's one side of the Reddit. We have to be careful about not misrepresenting the data. On the other side, you have some people in this person's comments talking about 2.5 million defensive gun uses a year, which is based on a repeatedly debunked article from the 90s by Kleck and Gertz, which is, nonsense in the other direction.
The Bible's main goal is spiritual redemption, not social reform.
Everybody, this video is factually incorrect in every one of the points that it makes, but I want to focus on the audio that you just heard, which first off treats the Bible univocally, which is nonsense because the Bible is a collection of a wide variety of complex and often competing rhetorical goals. Next, it puts the cart firmly before the horse and ignores a bunch of parts of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures that insist that you don't get the redemption until you get the social reform. Clearest example of that is Hosea 6:6, that is quoted by Jesus in the book of Matthew twice, that will have mercy and not sacrifice. This is condemning the people who focused on their performance of religious duties to the detriment of the plight of the poor and the oppressed. And they repeatedly said, you have to treat the one problem before you can achieve the redemption. It's hypocrisy to do it the other way around. Hey, thanks for the question. I don't think it's loaded at all. I think it's a perfectly valid question. I'm not an atheist. I lived for the first 20 years of my life as kind of an agnostic. I just wasn't raised with religion. But I did join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm an active member of that church. In fact, I am employed as a scripture translation supervisor for that church right now. So I sympathize with the different perspectives related to religion, and I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm engaging scholarship. Regarding your other question, it's usually a good idea for scholars to acknowledge their biases, the perspectives that they come from. It's usually a bad idea to attack those biases, those perspectives as invalid in and of themselves in scholarship, but that's not really common among scholars. We tend to be pretty good about that kind of thing. Hey everybody, 4 quick facts about the Hebrew word Elohim from an expert. 1, Elohim is the plural form of the singular term El, which means deity, and that's as far as we can go etymologically. No indication it has any relationship to the word for mighty. 2, Elohim is grammatically plural, but is frequently used to refer to a singular entity, and there's nothing special or unique about that usage. It happens all over Northwest Semitic languages with all kinds of words. 3, Elohim does not mean judges. It means deity or deities. If a writer uses that term in reference to a human, they are calling that human a deity, which is not an ontological label, but one with reference to roles and relationships. 4, you cannot define deity or Elohim. It can't be reduced to necessary and sufficient features because it's not how the category was formed or used. There is only one thing that is shared by every single entity labeled Elohim, and that is that that entity has been labeled Elohim.
What is a fact or statistic that seems fake but is real?
Words and texts have no inherent meaning whatsoever. What you read on a page, there's no meaning that somehow travels through your eyes into your mind. What they are squiggles that have relationships that have been agreed upon to sounds, and combinations of sounds have relationships that have been agreed upon to semantic content. And so the process of reading is our minds recalling those relationships as we understand them and constructing the meaning in our minds. So when we approach old texts, like the Bible, in the United States, things like the Constitution, what we're doing is reconstructing the meaning based on our best guess regarding how they understood the relationships. And that's if we care at all about how they understood the relationships. Frequently, all we care about is how we understand the relationships and what it means to us. Hey everybody, a little bit on the King James Version of the Bible. It is not technically a translation, but a revision of a 1602 edition of the Bishop's Bible, itself a revision of an earlier Bible, which was a revision of an earlier Bible, going back to Tyndale's translation of the New Testament and his translation of the Old Testament up through Chronicles, and then the book of Jonah, as well as the other books of the Old Testament, completed by Miles Coverdale, who actually went to German translations and some Latin in order to fill in the gaps. King James translators basically wrote the changes into the margins of copies of the Bishop's Bible, and they consulted a bunch of different manuscripts, but the primary New Testament source text was a variety of versions of the Textus Receptus, which was originally based on a small number of very late Greek New Testament manuscripts that had a lot of differences from what we now understand to be the earliest text of the New Testament. Hey everybody, I wanted to take 60 seconds to talk about how there's just no such thing as biblical literalism. It does not exist. Every faith group that has ever approached the biblical text has done so with a set of rhetorical goals and with a set of expectations drawn from their understanding of their own sacred past. And reading the text is a process of negotiating with the text in light of those rhetorical goals. And while that sometimes involves asserting literal approaches to certain texts, it inevitably also involves rejecting literal approaches to other texts, because the priority in all of this is the needs and goals of the faith community. The Bible is not the priority. The Bible is secondary. It is this authority to which the group appeals for their beliefs. It is not the source of their beliefs. So there's just no such thing as a biblical literalist. They're ideological literalists, and they appeal to the Bible for their authority, but they did not get their beliefs from the Bible.